Hi there, this is Power and Politics. I'm JP Tasker in Ottawa. Canada has launched its new Major Projects Office, part of Prime Minister Mark Carney's plans to speed up approvals for projects that are deemed of national interest.
That's going to have everything from making sure there's energy corridors to ports to transportation infrastructure to mines, you name it.
We'll hear from the Parliamentary Secretary to the Energy Minister just ahead. Plus,
the use of force, including lethal force, is presumed reasonable against an individual who unlawfully enters a house and poses a threat to the safety of anyone inside.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is proposing an amendment to the criminal code. He says the changes are necessary to protect Canadians who defend their homes against intruders. Our panel of insiders is here to weigh in. And Canada's economy shrank in the second quarter as U.S. tariffs continue to squeeze Canada's exports. We'll hear from a business owner who's grappling with new U.S. tariffs. Power and Politics starts right now. Prime Minister Mark Carney's plans to accelerate nation-building projects is taking another big step forward today. Carney has officially launched the Major Projects Office, outlined in Bill C-5, which says its mandate is to advance major projects in Canada and streamline federal regulatory project approval. The government has appointed Dawn Farrell to lead the office, a longtime energy executive. She's the former CEO of the Trans Mountain Corporation. So what does that say about the kind of projects the government will fast-track? Corey Hogan is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources and joins me now. Hi, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, glad to be here.
So you're launching the Major Projects Office today. The government has already passed C-5 to fast-track approvals for these nation-building initiatives. All of the pieces seem to be falling into place. When will the government deliver a list of projects?
Well, like the announcement said today, you're not going to have to wait long. It will be in the next couple of weeks here. I think the Prime Minister and the ministers that joined him on his recent trip to Europe have started to tease the kind of projects that you can expect to come out in the next bit. But, fundamentally, they're all about building Canada and supporting us diversifying our trade relationships. So stay tuned. It won't be very long now. We're talking weeks, not months. And I think people will be pretty pleased with what they see.
What would you like to see approved?
Well, look, there's going to be, I think, more projects added throughout the fall. It's going to be a bit of a rolling list, but what I want to see are fundamentally the things that allow us to access new markets and develop new sectors. And so that's going to have everything from making sure there's energy corridors to ports to transportation infrastructure to mines, you name it. I think what's exciting about the list is that it is going to allow us to build a lot of sectors and build a very robust Canadian economy.
The Prime Minister said this week there is enormous potential for liquefied natural gas in Canada. Is it safe to say that there will be some sort of LNG proposal on this list of nation-building projects?
Well, no, like I said, you're going to have to wait a couple of weeks to get anything as to the specifics of the list out of me. But fundamentally, it is about building a strong economy. That obviously liquefied natural gas is as an area of opportunity for this country. I think the Prime Minister's been clear about that. The Minister of Energy's been clear about that. But you're going to have to wait and see what's on the actual list.
Minister Hodgson said this week that optimizing the Trans Mountain pipeline is not necessarily a project of national interest. It won't necessarily be on this list that's coming in the next few weeks, as you say. But is your government looking at expanding the capacity of TMX?
Well, there's a couple of things that we kind of have to unpack there. One is that there are projects of national interest, which is a designation that allows for concurrent approvals to happen rather than waterfall approvals of Department A does it, Department B does it, Department C does it. And then there are just building things. And the Major Project Office is charged with assisting both, expediting both, helping those projects get access to capital. So just to be super clear, just because something is not designated on that list does not mean they're not going to benefit from the Major Projects Office. In terms of getting additional capacity out of TMX, I think personally that's a great idea. You always want to look at how you optimize the capacity of your pipelines, of your power infrastructure, because building new infrastructure obviously comes with heightened costs. So looking forward to seeing more from TMX in terms of their plans, but just really want to underline doesn't need to be a project of national interest to be a project of national interest, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. The Conservatives say this new office is essentially another layer of bureaucracy. They're framing it as a roadblock to getting things built. They say the government's, you've been in office for 170 days and nothing's been done yet. What's your defense in the face of that Conservative criticism?
Well, yesterday happened to be 100 days since I was sworn in, so the calendar is pretty fresh in my mind. And I think that this has been at a pretty impressive pace in that 100 days. The fact that the legislation was passed to activate this office, the fact that we now have a CEO, we have a headquarters, these things are occurring. As I mentioned, those lists are coming imminently. And, with all respect to my colleagues across the aisle, they would be the first to be saying that businesses need support in getting through some of these regulatory hurdles. And that's what we're providing. And this is how we're going to be building Canada strong. In fact, they voted for this legislation that it sounds like now maybe they have some qualms with. And so I don't fully take that critique, but certainly it's a good reminder that we need to move fast, and there's going to be an opposition that's going to hold us to account on that fact.
Some folks are a bit anxious with the idea of you moving fast, though. Some First Nations and environmental groups were out today slamming this announcement, slamming the office and its very concept, saying the government is sidelining Indigenous rights, weakening environmental protections. This is your chance to reassure them. Why should they have faith in this process?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, the legislation that it comes from really underlines that these standards are not diminished. And in fact, the central role of First Nations and rights holders in these projects is, if anything, strengthened through Bill C5, now that we've got it as a full act, as Building Canada Act. And that the Prime Minister was crystal clear about that. And one of the things that was announced today, along with the Major Projects Office, is the Indigenous Advisory Council that's going to go with that. And every project is going to look through that lens. That's just a fundamental reality. And the fact is, that's not something we even could legislate away. That's a constitutional right that Indigenous peoples have. So we know, certainly the history of this country has been, and increasingly affirmed by the courts, things do not get built unless you get everybody to the table and you work with partners. And certainly Dawn Farrell, the new CEO of the Major Projects Office, knows that too. She has worked on some of the most contentious projects that you can imagine. She's done it while building allies across environmentalists and across Indigenous peoples. And people are going to be very well served by this office and the leadership that was announced today.
Yeah, speaking of Dawn Farrell, she is the former CEO of Trans Mountain. She's the former CEO of TransAlta, an electricity company in your province. She's currently on the board of ATCO, a Calgary-based utilities firm with a natural gas business. Given her experience, why should Canadians trust her to act in the country's interest instead of just doing what's right for industry?
Well, most Canadians know her because of Trans Mountain, as you said, but a lot of Westerners know her because of her work in the power sector. And Alberta is not just a conventional energy producer. Alberta is a renewable energy producer at significant scale, particularly when you look at solar and wind. And when you compare growth in those sectors in Alberta to other provinces, may surprise some of the viewers to know Alberta is going to come out number one on that particular list. And that's really been driven by our power sector. So Dawn, of course, worked with TransAlta. ATCO has interests in all sorts of projects, not just natural gas, not that there's anything wrong with natural gas. And Dawn also worked at BC Hydro, which, as the name sort of suggests, has quite a bit of hydro as well. And her experience is varied, but it also allows her to draw upon some of the more tricky situations that she's had to deal with in the past. Of course, we're all aware of Indigenous rights still being and land claims still being untangled in the province of British Columbia. We know that for most major energy infrastructure projects, those matters can become more contentious, and Dawn has handled them ably, and she's built partners along the way while doing so.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you. Corey Hogan, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. Thanks for coming on, sir. Nice to see you.
Absolutely a pleasure. Thank you.
Let's get the opposition reaction to this now. Melissa Lantsman is the Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party. Thanks for coming on, Melissa. Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So the government has launched this Major Projects Office today. They've named an industry-friendly CEO to lead it, and they say that work will get underway soon on improving projects. But you're skeptical of the whole thing. Tell me why.
Well, we've heard the consistency of the message of like coming soon, coming soon. It's taken Mark Carney 5 months to set up an office that will one day consider approving a project. So that's 5 months for an office. That's not 5 months for project permits or shovels in the ground. It's an office at the time when an economy's in free fall, and this is the man who promised to make it all better, all while our allies are doing it much faster. We've seen countries like Germany, and I know that you've had the German ambassador on. They've got an entire LNG ports built online in 190 days. The same thing in Finland and other places in Europe that have gone from approval to construction to completion in the time, or just over the time, where we have announced yet another bureaucracy. So I think I'm not the only one that's going to be skeptical. I think Canadians are going to be skeptical about bureaucracy to frankly solve for the problems that are bureaucratic in nature to begin with.
I hear your concerns about more bureaucracy, but the Conservative Party platform from the most recent election had something similar in there as well. You were pitching a rapid resource office to streamline regulatory approvals. Your party saw some value in an office like this earlier in the year. What's changed?
Yeah, but here's what we were pitching. We were also pitching getting rid of the existing bureaucracy that gets in the way of building projects. So that's Bill C-69. We also pitched getting rid of the tanker ban on the West Coast. We pitched getting rid of the energy cap, the industrial carbon tax, the insane EV mandate that puts another $20,000 on the cost of a car. We pitched making Canadian reinvestment in Canada makes sense in so much as that we would reward that investment by taking the capital gains off of every dollar reinvested in Canada. So yeah, you pitch an office, but you pitch it after all of these things are taken out of the way. You don't pitch more bureaucracy on top of the bureaucracy that you already have.
The oil and gas industry is saying some similar things to what you just mentioned there. They want to see some of that legislation that they feel like is holding back development stripped away. They want to get rid of C-69. That has been their rallying cry for a long time. But they seem to be sort of pleased with what the government has announced today. They're applauding the launch of this office. They're saying that Dawn Farrell, who will be the CEO, is the ideal candidate, and that the government is taking concrete steps to, quote, make Canada an energy superpower, and this is sending a positive signal to industry and investors. Why does CAP have it wrong here?
Well, look, I think that the industry has been so beaten down by the very fact that we've seen nothing go forward in this country in more than 10 years. Tells you everything you need to know about just even a modicum of good news for them. They're going to celebrate. But for Canadians who were told in an election that after a lost Liberal decade that they were going to build and spur innovation and build projects, and 5 months down the line, all we have is an office. Look, we still got nothing. We've got no shovels in the ground. We've got no list of projects. And I know that it says that it's all coming, but that's what happens every single day with this government. They had an about face on saying all of the right things, but in terms of results, they've shown Canadians nothing. And I don't think this office is the thing that's going to do it. Look, there's one more thing with this office, and we know that the Prime Minister used to do this on projects, but this is an office that's going to further pick winners and losers and not allow the market to decide. That's all this office is, and I think it's a big problem.
Yeah, speaking of picking winners and losers, the CEO, Dawn Farrell, I mentioned, she was the CEO of Trans Mountain. She was the CEO of TransAlta, another electricity company in Alberta. She was on the board of ATCO, a Calgary-based utility firm that also has business in natural gas. Are you concerned about her being in a compromised position, in a conflict of interest, given she's coming directly from industry into an office that will pick projects, or at least help the government pick projects that should go ahead?
Look, I think it should always be a concern when the government is picking winners and losers. I have no idea about her or her career. What I do know is that when we come back to Parliament, we're still going to encourage every single party. We're going to put down a motion at the earliest opportunity to repeal all of these growth blocking laws, to reward those who build, to protect Canadian innovation. And I suspect if she's got all of these accolades, that she will agree and she'll encourage the government to actually tear down the bureaucracy rather than putting her in charge of a brand new one that puts projects on the back burner. That's what we're concerned about.
All right, let's leave it there. Melissa Lantsman is the Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says he wants to amend the criminal code to protect Canadians who use force to defend their homes against intruders. Our Political Pulse panel will dive into Poilievre's proposal later this hour. But first, Russia's latest attacks on Ukraine are receiving international condemnation, and European leaders are accusing Russian President Vladimir Putin of undermining peace talks. We'll hear from Canada's ambassador to Ukraine next. Stay with us. European leaders are accusing Russia of mocking the peace process in Ukraine with its deadly strikes on Kyiv.
À l'issue de la longue réunion que nous avons eue ensemble il y a quelques semaines,
Today, the French president said the U.S. has given Vladimir Putin until Monday to meet with his Ukrainian counterpart. If the Russian president doesn't come to the table, quote, once again, it will mean that President Trump has been played by President Putin. Russia's major airstrikes on Thursday were the first attacks on Kyiv in weeks and included a rare strike on its city center. So is hope for peace falling apart? Natalka Simak is the Canadian ambassador to Ukraine and joins me now. Nice to see you, Ambassador. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with the brutal attack on Kyiv. Russia pounded the capital with some 600 drones, more than 30 missiles. At least 23 people are dead. What is the mood like there in Ukraine as the people grapple with yet another violent assault?
Yes, so thanks for starting with that. It was, having been there and experienced it myself, I can tell you that it was scary, it is loud, and from what I understand, because I was part of the briefing, that they took us to a site probably where most of the people had died, and it's devastating to see. So every location, every district of Kyiv was affected or had a hit, so it was very dramatic, and mostly residential buildings. As you know, it included the EU mission. The British Council was also affected. So very traumatic, and people are angry.
There was a lot of happy talk earlier this month about a potential deal to bring this war to a close. President Trump was sounding optimistic after that summit in Alaska. What does an attack like this do to the prospects for peace?
I think it just makes people more determined to make sure that people are at the center, the cost of this war is kept in mind, and that Ukrainians absolutely have to be at the table to be able to speak of the people who are most impacted.
Was President Trump naive about the Russians and their willingness to end the war?
I wouldn't put it that way. I think he is very much driven by the peace process to stop the killings. So I think he's well aware that the human cost is very high, and I believe that's what's driving him to really do what he can to stop the war. Now, of course, I'm not an American expert. I'm the Canadian ambassador to Ukraine, so speaking a little bit outside my zone here.
But as a Canadian involved in these sort of discussions, of course, we're part of the coalition of the willing. Trump has put himself in the middle of all this. Does Canada feel confident in the president's peacemaking abilities?
I think he's crucial. I think the very fact that he is getting President Putin to have these dialogues is important. Ukrainians, as you know, have now met directly, not at the leader level, but have also met at Istanbul 3 times. Most of the exchange of prisoners of war and the recent exchange of civilians, including on Independence Day, was due to those conversations. So we might be frustrated with the pace. I would love to see it happen much sooner, but dialogue is happening and these conversations are happening. I think that's what's really important here.
Prime Minister Carney was in Kyiv this week to announce another $2 billion worth of support for Ukraine, funds that will help buy equipment, including armored vehicles, drones, among other things. What has been the reaction there to Canada's commitment?
So first of all, I would like to say that he was very warmly welcomed to Kyiv. The Ukrainians, it was very positively received by Ukrainians in the media and very much appreciated. He was, as you know, the only foreign leader sort of highlighted the most important guest of that day on Independence Day. He addressed the public at the ceremony. It was very well received. What you might not have seen on the image is that he was actually speaking directly to the Ukrainian armed forces, which was very powerful, thanking them for what they do, acknowledging all the good work that they're doing. And I would say that the media really, and the public, the Ukrainian public, really appreciated appreciated the announcement of the military package, the planned cooperation for drone manufacturing. That went over very well, and Canada's role of the Coalition of the Willing. And of course, his reiteration of intensifying Canada's role or the return of children. So with the International Coalition for the Return of Children.
It's hard to talk about the post-war period given what is going on in Kyiv, but I want to ask you about security guarantees. Prime Minister Carney has not ruled out the possibility of putting Canadian troops on the ground in Ukraine after this conflict is over. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so he did. The media really appreciated that he gave very direct, open answers. And he was asked directly on sort of Canadian support. And the Prime Minister was clear about the question of having Canadian forces on the ground. And he said he wouldn't rule it out. Now, he was speaking it in context of a whole series of possible responses to provide assistance. He put that also in terms of more intelligence support, logistics, and a variety, equipment support, financial support. So that was part of the answer. But the point is that he was very clear that Canada remains open.
Why was Canada not at the White House meeting with Trump and the other European leaders to discuss these matters, to discuss post-war peace and security? We are, as you say, part of the Coalition of the Willing, and yet we were left out.
So I think that the whole security guarantees are really closely tied to Europe. And so what you saw was the UK, France, and mostly European solidarity with Ukraine, because a lot of this plays also to the fact that Ukraine is working very hard to join the European Union. And so I think that's where the solidarity came from.
Zelensky is asking Ukraine's allies to crank up the pressure on the Russian economy through sanctions and tariffs. I think it's a message really directed at the Americans, but is there anything more Canada can do to squeeze the Russian war machine?
I think the Prime Minister is pretty committed on this as well. And as was said at the G7, I think that we're looking at, as Canada, definitely on financial institutions, oil price cap on Russian oil, for example. So we know that the pressure needs to keep going on. Keep the pressure on Russia, and sanctions is a very important tool in that toolbox.
All right, we'll leave it there. Ambassador Natalka Simak, thank you for your time today. I appreciate you coming on. Stay safe.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Small businesses are taking another hit from U.S. tariffs. An exemption that allowed Canadian businesses to ship small packages to the U.S. duty-free ends today. We'll hear from a Canadian business owner on what this dramatic change means for him. Next. Canada's economy shrank in the second quarter of this year. GDP slowed by 1.6% on an annualized basis, mainly driven by exports declining by 7.5% in that quarter. Exports could soon be taking another hit. Duty-free U.S. shipping for small packages, also known as a de minimis exemption, ends today. Joey Walsh is the president and founder of Hockey Stick Man. He joins me now. Hi, Joey. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, JP.
So until now, all goods valued at $800 or less were going into the States duty-free. That ends today. It's causing anxiety and confusion all over the world. Break it down for our audience. What is the impact on your business of this move?
Yeah, no problem. So we specialize in selling discount or affordable hockey equipment and we've been doing so for the past 15 years. So we have some great customers on both sides of the border. And fortunately, we've always been able to work back and forth to the border by brokering it in through the North American Free Trade or CUSMA exemptions, and then shipping it back into the United States tariff-free. Those changes have come up recently that everybody knows about. But even with the tariffs in place, there was a loophole or an exemption of $800 for low-value goods. So anything that you were shipping into the United States, whether it be something you're sending down to your grandmother or down in Florida, or whether you're an e-commerce company like us that ships hockey products down there, as long as it was under $800, it didn't make sense for them to do anything with it, and that's changed as of today.
Yeah, 92% of all U.S. cargo shipments and 4 million packages daily are going to lose their duty-free status. That's one of the figures I saw today. That's pretty eye-popping. And I understand about a third of your business is with the Americans, right, to U.S. customers. Are you expecting there will be a sales hit as a result of this change? Your products just got more expensive, right, for U.S. consumers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's going to be a sales hit, and there's going to be a rocky stretch for everybody in the industry, whether you're a big company or a small company like myself. It's just how we're going to be able to weather the storm. And the challenge is that, us as a small company may not have the resources to weather the storm as well as people with the more resources and the bigger companies. And I think that's probably standard across. What you're going to see is the smaller companies are going to have to, stop with their day-to-day, being product focused and stuff like that, and focus on paperwork and distribution and things like that we really don't want focused on.
Yeah, you haven't really had a lot of time to prepare for this, right? President Trump announced this change earlier in the summer. Has it been a mad scramble for you to get all the paperwork in order?
The stability of it, JP, is challenging because there really is no answer to the question. Like, it may stay. Many people believe it won't. So as much as we have saw this coming, you can't prepare for it because you don't know if it is going to come, if it's actually going to take place, or if it's going to stay. They did try it in February, and it lasted 4 days. So, the challenge is that you want to spend all of this money and infrastructure to change your entire business to basically run out of the United States without knowledge of whether or not it's actually going to stay. And there's a lot of people, that believe that 4 million packages a day is not worth the government's time to formal entry process in the United States, and that it's not sustainable and it's not feasible. So we have to be patient, and we have to not overreact because it's a big infrastructure change, and that's the challenge, is that we can adapt accordingly, but not if it's not going to stay. It's not worth doing.
Yeah. All right, let's leave it there. Joey Walsh, president and founder of Hockey Stick Man. I wish you good luck with this.
Thank you.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is proposing an amendment to the criminal code that would make all force, including lethal force, legal for Canadians protecting their homes from intruders. Should the government increase legal protections for Canadians fending off home invaders? The Power Panel will join us for that conversation next. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says Canada needs to change the criminal code to increase legal protections for Canadians who choose to defend themselves against home intruders.
If someone enters your home illegally and uninvited, and two, you reasonably believe they're a threat to your family, then it is assumed that all the force you use against that person is reasonable and legal. That is the test that our bill will bring in.
The CBC's Kat Tunney is following this story for us. Kat, why is Poilievre proposing this amendment to the criminal code? What exactly would it change?
Yeah, well, JP, he appears to be jumping in a very emotional and very loud conversation that's happening right now about self-defense and what you can and cannot do in your own home. And of course, this debate is in the spotlight mainly because last week police charged a man with aggravated assault after someone allegedly broke into his home in Lindsay, Ontario. And there's still many missing facts in this story as it kind of works its way through the court system. But it's led to a lot of public outrage outcry. And this is not the only case where someone has faced charges due to a home invasion. So what Poilievre is pushing is kind of an amendment to the criminal code to clarify what is reasonable when someone comes into your home and poses a threat. And to be clear, the existing law does allow you to respond. It does allow you to defend yourself within reason and if it's proportional. And the courts are kind of asked to consider 9 factors when determining what is reasonable, things like what weapons were used, the size of the 2 people or how many people are involved, and of course, how real the threat was as well. So the Conservative proposal, as you saw there, it's much more simple. There's 2 conditions he's asking to look at, and it would really make sure that reasonableness is presumed in these cases. Now, legal experts that we've been speaking today are raising some concerns. Some bit of a slippery slope is the term I've heard a few times today. Concerns about that this would give people a license to resort to violence. Worry that this would lead to more deaths in these cases. And I think no one is saying that people should be allowed to break into your home, but I think there's some concern about, well, what happens if there's a mistake? What happens if someone's drunk and it's at your door? Like, would you have the right to shoot them? Like, these are questions that people are asking right now. And then there's also some concerns about, I have heard today about perhaps a knee-jerk reaction to a story that we don't have all the details in. And just, as a really quick summary, so far all we really know, according to court documents in this Lindsay case, is that the tenant, Jeremy McDonald, used a knife to attack the accused, the alleged intruder, this guy named Michael Breen, who was allegedly carrying a crossbow. So it sounds like a lot of things happened behind those closed doors. Acquaintances have told CBC the 2 men knew each other. So a lot more to find out in that case. And just to kind of wrap this up, Justice Minister Sean Fraser did come out today in a social media post responding to what Poilievre has put out there, kind of dismissing it. Does not sound like the Liberals by any stretch are going to take this and carry it forward. He accused Poilievre of basically attacking the police in this case and the work that they're doing, and has said that he basically is chasing photo ops. So it doesn't sound like it's coming from the Liberals, but the Conservative leader was adamant this morning that he'll bring a bill forward in some kind of form, like a private member's bill. So we will likely be hearing more about this fall.
I'm sure we will. Okay. Thanks to CBC's Kat Tunney. Thanks for that report. Lots to discuss with our panel of political insiders. Supriya Dwivedi was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Here with me is Fred Delory, a former Conservative campaign manager. And Anne McGrath is a former director of the New Democratic Party. Hi, guys. Nice to see you all on this Friday. Supriya, I want to start with you on this one. What do you make of Poilievre's proposal here? I mean, he is using this Lindsay case, which does frankly seem a bit terrifying. Like, some guy storms into your home with a crossbow and then you get charged for defending yourself. Doesn't seem that great. What do you make of what he is pitching here? It seems like a populist catnip, if you will.
Yeah, sure. But it is, to your point, super understandable as to why this issue is garnering so much attention as it is, right? In that case in particular, someone breaks into your home in the middle of the night armed with a crossbow and you somehow get charged as well. It just does seem, again, on its face, you read the facts, patently absurd. So it makes complete sense why the Conservatives would jump on this. But it starts to make a lot less sense once you realize that the entire reason why we have proportionality kind of included, as well as those other conditions that Kat kind of alluded to, is because of Bill C-26, which is the Citizens Arrest and Self-Defense Act. That received royal assent in June of 2012, and the measures came into force in March of 2013. So all of those existing provisions on self-defense and the defense of property, with these new defenses that were put in there with the goal of, simplifying and clarifying the law, all came into force in 2013. Can somebody remind me who was in government then? And look, it's completely fine to change your mind. And I think we should encourage more of that in politics. And if he thinks the Conservative government got it wrong, because they're the ones who, the OG ones who introduced the legislation to include proportional force, then come out and say that. And I will just end, and let my other colleague jump in here in a sec. But it is very common sense that you would want the law to be on the person's side who is trying to fend off the intruder, right? So if what they want to get to is, if someone breaks into your home, then you should essentially be legally allowed to kill them, then I think they should say that. And to be clear, it's not because I think it's a losing argument, because if I'm being honest, as a recent-ish widow who lives alone in Toronto with my 6-year-old daughter, I think that's an okay argument to make, but then make it. Don't dance around it.
Yeah. Fred, what do you make of this proposal? I mean, there is something similar in the United States, which people have probably heard of, the stand your ground law, right? And there's been some controversy around that one because some folks are getting inadvertently killed, right, as a result of this law that essentially allows you to take someone out if they're on your property. Is there a risk that there's like a slippery slope here as they try and toughen the law, as Poilievre proposes to go even further than the laws that are on the books already?
Look, I don't know the actual details of this and what it'll do policy-wise, but just looking at the politics of it, going back to this last election we just had, everyone was predicting, myself included, a Liberal majority government. And one of the things that really, I think, helped the Conservatives, in particularly in the GTA area where they picked up some unexpected seats, was crime.
Yeah.
Crime is a major, major issue in this country. And I don't think the Liberals had a good response to that during the campaign. Poilievre campaigned hard on it. And this fits into that narrative. He's trying to build some kind of narrative. He's been out this summer with some different ideas. He had carbon tax 2.0, which I don't think is going to go very far. But this sort of thing, I think, fits into a narrative that he could actually get people galvanized behind him on this.
I know I heard that when I was with the Conservative campaign in the 905, like every door you went to in Vaughan and Richmond Hill and Markham and Oakville and Burlington, like crime was a major consideration for voters. And we weren't really talking about it, frankly, all that much as an election issue until those last few weeks when the Conservatives were telling me, my sources, like, listen, this is a big motivator for folks. People are tired of getting their cars stolen. People are tired of home invasions. People are tired of whatever, you know? And do you think that this has some political firepower to it? Do you think that this is actually something that has some appeal to people? I mean, I said it's populist catnip, and it really is in a way, because how do you stand against something like this? It's tough, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with this latest case in Lindsay, it really is a talker. Like, this is the kind of thing that people are talking about over coffee, at the water fountain, in the lunchrooms, around the family dinner table. So I think that it does have a lot of resonance, and I think people are very worried about crime, legitimately so. However, I don't think that Pierre Poilievre is the right messenger. On this, I watched the newser that he had today. Number one, I think that it is political catnip, and it does potentially go way too far, and does seem to encourage some kind of vigilantism. So I think that there's real problems with it. But the main problem, I think, is that Poilievre on this issue, he didn't sound sincere in his news. I felt very badly for those poor kids that had to stand behind him for all that time.
It wasn't a great look, to have the children.
And he sounded sort of stilted and halting, and the main thing I took from it was that he's decided that there was absolutely nothing wrong with their last election campaign, and that he's just going to go full steam ahead. And I think that's a mistake.
Yes, Supriya, we heard from Justice Minister Sean Fraser. Kat talked about this earlier, and he said that Poilievre is just chasing a photo op by attacking police for doing their jobs, referring to laying charges in the Lindsay case. I trust police to lay charges and judges to consider evidence over Pierre playing cops and robbers. What's interesting too, Supriya, is there's this issue to deal with, but there is also the bail reform issue that's probably going to come up in the fall too, right? We've heard from Sean Fraser. He does want to take action on that because there is this push within the Carney government to take a harder line on crime. Where do the Liberals find themselves on this issue? What do you think is the best strategy for them as they approach this issue in the fall?
I think they're going to have to walk an interesting kind of careful line here. I appreciate the Justice Minister's tweet. I think it was a good tweet. I think it has the right amount of snark in it. However, you don't want to come off as though you're downplaying folks' concern. To Fred's point, and to your point, JP, about how the last bit of the campaign really started shaping up, is quite true. People are very concerned with crime, and you don't want to make it seem as though you're dismissing conservative concerns with respect to how we're going to go about to, make sure that Canadians are essentially safer than they are currently in their homes or, in their communities. And I think the Liberals right now are striking the right tone, but they have to be careful into keeping the concern and the snark in the right sort of, ratio.
Yeah. I want to get your guys' perspective on the other big news from today. They have the government has named the former chair of Trans Mountain as the CEO of the Major Projects Office that will oversee the approvals process of different infrastructure projects that are coming about. The Canadian petroleum producers are happy about this announcement, some Indigenous groups, as well as the Bloc Québécois environmentalists. The Conservatives as well, for different reasons, are not happy with what was announced today. Here is Melissa Lantsman, the Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party, on this announcement. Have a listen.
At the time when an economy's in free fall, and this is the man who promised to make it all better, all while our allies are doing it much faster. Canadians are going to be skeptical about bureaucracy to frankly solve for the problems that are bureaucratic in nature to begin with.
Fred, what do you make of this major projects office and what they announced today?
I think it's a good start. I know my friends in the Conservative Party are wishing it was done 5 months ago, the day Carney came into office, but it does take time to do these things. And I think that's kind of the difficulty of being in opposition. You've got to find something to attack on, and I think they should just be giving these guys more rope to hang themselves, and let's see what they can actually produce from this office. Let's see what they do. Let's hope that they succeed. I want to see them get things built. All Canadians should. And if they don't, I think that's when the Conservatives should be getting aggressive with them. Now, I wouldn't say is the time to do it.
And the Conservatives, of course, pitched their own major projects office during the election, right?
Right.
And I take your point. It's like when you're in opposition, you just have to find something to chew on. And do you think that there is a risk politically for the government from the progressive side of things? Because, you know, the government is moving ahead, and you might even say it's fairly conservative in its approach to natural resources. Carney was saying this week in Europe, we're full steam ahead with LNG, you know, not saying drill, baby, drill, but basically, right?
Yep.
Opening the door to much more energy development in this country. Do you sense an opening for the NDP in particular on this, as we hear from environmentalists and First Nations and folks who are worried about what's to come?
I absolutely do. I think that this is a very conservative Prime Minister, very conservative Liberal leader, and we see there's plenty of evidence on that. I think that the criticism from the opposition, from the Conservative opposition, is kind of weak sauce.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, oh, we would have done it faster. We would. I mean, that's classic opposition. When you have nothing else that you can say, that's what you say, right? But I do think that they have moved very quickly on this. There is a lot of concern from progressives about what it means to move that quickly. How important environmental safety is going to be in all of this, the role of Indigenous consultation and Indigenous support for these kinds of things. I think that if they're able to get a lot of Indigenous support, which I think is possible for some projects, that they could find that they've got a path forward on that. But I think right now the door is open, I think, for a strong opposition, progressive opposition from the NDP. The dilemma, of course, is that we're in a leadership campaign right now. The party is in kind of a review and renewal process, and so that makes it difficult, I think. But I do believe that the door is open for when the NDP has a permanent leader to really go in there and take up some space.
Yes, Supriya, I was looking at the delegation list of the folks that went with Carney and Hodgson, the Natural Resources Minister, to Europe this week, and there were a lot of Indigenous names on that list. There were a lot of Indigenous proponents of LNG projects, of pipelines, of you name it. There was a lot of interest from First Nations groups going to Germany trying to pitch LNG. I don't think we would have seen that list maybe 10, 15 years ago. There has been a shift among some First Nations to embrace these projects, and the Liberal government seems to want to put them front and center as they go full tilt boogie on some sort of development.
For sure. And I mean, you kind of need to, right? You're not going to get any projects done without Indigenous First Nations support in this country. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's smart for the government to be doing that. But I think to Anne's point, it's a good one, and it's a very salient one. Most of the opposition that's going to be coming from this, at least the substantive stuff, is going to be coming from the progressive or the left sort of flank. And in order for the government to sort of continue to move forward and to be successful, they're going to have to, I guess, at some point, either figure out how to keep their left flank happy, or they just go full steam ahead and then I reap the consequences, I guess, for what that does for their, coalition of voter support.
Well, I do a quick round on the NDP leadership race that you mentioned, Anne. This week, we heard that Avi Lewis and Heather McPherson are likely jumping in. The Toronto Star has sources saying that they will enter the race maybe as soon as next week. How are you feeling about the party's prospects in this whole leadership race?
Well, I'm delighted to hear that there are two strong, contenders coming in for the leadership race. I would like to see a really vibrant, maybe even controversial race. I think that it wouldn't hurt the party to have. I think the review is really good and everything, but a lot of this stuff will come out in the leadership race, and there are some legitimate, deep questions, I think, that the NDP has to grapple with around, are we the conscience of Parliament, the conscience of the nation? Do we actually want to ever govern? I fall on the we would like to govern wing of the party.
Right.
But I want to have...
Some don't, though.
That's right. And I want to have that debate. I think that it's important. And I'm happy to see that there are strong people coming forward with different perspectives on these things. And I hope to see more strong candidates emerge over the next little while.
Fred?
NDP is very similar to the Conservative Party, where every leadership race is a battle for the heart and soul of the party. What does the party mean? What is it going to mean to Canadians in the next election? So it'll be interesting to see what kind of contenders come in there and what they're championing, and can they actually reach Anne's dream of actually forming a national government. That of course remains to be seen.
Supriya, about 30 seconds to you.
I mean, I've been working this whole time on my hashtag Draft McGrath platform. So
then they'd really have a shot.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, look, I think I also would like for the NDP to be in a position where they can maybe perhaps form government. So I'm with Anne that I think it's all well and good for heart and soul, but government's the goal.
Can we convince you, Anne? Are you announcing tonight?
Here. Yeah.
Well, if you do, I really hope it's me hosting and we do it right here. All right, let's leave it there. Thank you so much to the Friday Pulse panel, Supriya Dwivedi, Fred Delory, and Anne McGrath. Nice to see you all. I'm JP Tasker. Thank you so much for watching Power and Politics. There's a lot more coming up on CBC News Network. Stay right there.